Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. Today is 27th February. Earlier in the morning a year ago, something happened which is the stuff of great films. But before we go to enact what happened and discuss why that happened, let's just watch this.
In February last year, 40 Indian troops were killed in an attack in occupied Kashmir's Pulwama district. The attack was carried out by a Kashmiri citizen, but India jumped the gun and blamed Pakistan for the incident. Pakistan's civilian and military leadership vehemently denied the Indian propaganda, terming the attack a false flag operation. Facing immense domestic pressure, India launched airstrikes in the town of Balakot in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Pakistan's Air Force retaliated to the violation immediately, forcing IAF fighter planes to drop their payloads early. New Delhi claimed it targeted a terrorist training camp, but evidence showed its bombs only damaged a few trees. In the ensuing air battle, the PAF jets shot down 2 fighter jets and captured one of their pilots. However, Pakistan returned Indian pilot Abhinandan Varthaman as a peace gesture. But India continued to threaten the regional peace by revoking Kashmir's special status and violating the ceasefire along the LOC repeatedly. The situation between the two countries is still tense as Kashmiris are forced to live under an inhumane Indian curfew. Islamabad has repeatedly called on the international community to help stop the conflict from turning into an all-out war.
Well, this is the background, but there's way more to it than just this in terms of what happened on the morning at 0920 hours when Pakistan Air Force strike package cluttered the scopes of Indian ground control radars. In the rear of the fighter package were PAF Saab airborne early warning and control system aircraft and the Da-20 Falcon carrying electronic warfare wizards. The IAF had stood guard on the night of 26 February when they expected a PF retaliatory strike. Extensive combat air patrols were flown that night by the IAF with surveillance support from ground radars as well as airborne early warning and control system aircraft. But nothing happened that night. It was deliberate. PF had planned to deceive the IAF, planning the strike for the morning of 27th February. The deception worked, and it worked very well. The IAF had eased off from its highest alert state and waited for the following night. A pair each of Su-30 MKIs and Mirage 2000 Is were patrolling in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir area. PF's approaching strike force caught the Indian air defense radars by surprise. Patrolling IAF fighters were directed to intercept them. They struggled. The communications environment had been degraded by PF's electronic warfare techniques, and IAF fighters were unable to understand the instructions of their air defense controllers. One Su-30 MKI, as per target data and confirming valid firing parameters, seemed to have been hit. Whether it made it back or crashed in IOK is a matter of speculation. But squadron leader Hassan Siddiqui, who engaged the Su, had called Fox 3, indicating an active radar-guided missile launch. The blip was gone after that. The other Indian Su announced that it was low on fuel and exited the area. The leader of the 2 remaining Indian Mirage 2000 Is also called out that his airborne intercept radar, along with that of his wingman, had gone bust. They were pulled out of the area too, and 5 MiG-21 Bisons were scrambled to intercept the PF fighters. The leader was Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman. He was shot out of the sky by Wing Commander Noman Ali Khan. The rest, as they say, is a cup of tea and history. There are many other details, but for those, we have our panel of experts to recap the events of February 27th morning when PF once again saved the day. We have with us Air Marshal Javed Ahmed, who is a director at the Center for Airspace and Strategic Studies. We also have with us Air Vice Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry and Lieutenant General Ghulam Mustafa. Thank you to all 3 of the panelists. Let me begin with Air Marshal Ahmed. Air Marshal Ahmed, as I said, once again, Pakistan Air Force saved the day. For Pakistan, I just narrated a couple of things from what happened, but just give us a sense of this requires a very high degree of training and combat capability and various other allied matters. Just give a sense to the informed journalist of how it worked that morning for the Pakistan Air Force.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think it all worked very well, and while we just narrate this as a 30-minute incident, but I think behind this were years of training. And if I tell you that the Air Force had all these targets ready and people standing by and well rehearsed for the last almost 18 years. So the Air Force has been ready all along. It has been trained to fight an enemy which is 3 times superior to it. There is always a rush to get the right resources to stay technologically ahead. So PF had all the right combination. I think some of the things which I would like to especially mention is the indigenous capability of the Pakistan Air Force, in which if you look at the package which was flying that day and you look at the Mirages, these were the same aircraft which Pakistan inducted in 1967. Now nobody in this era would even be operating cars of 1967, but because we had indigenous capability well established in Camra, we are still able to fly these aircraft and equip them with weapons which were almost bought almost 3 decades ago, but they've been indigenized. So indigenization was one strength. The second was the training, on which PF takes great pride. Now PF is a service which has remained alert. I would say all my life as a fighter pilot, I've remained on air defense alert duties. So it's a very, very operationally prepared and accountable Air Force. Every 3 months, the Air Force gets together to review its performance, to find out where all improvements are required and steps are taken accordingly. So I think this episode just proved that if you have a small force which is well trained, well motivated, which has the entire country behind it, which has the leadership of the country, which has given it full confidence to take on the enemy and teach them a lesson, I think it all came together very well.
Absolutely, it did. I obviously have many more questions for you, Marshal Ahmed, but let me hop over to AVM Shahzad Chaudhry. AVM Chaudhry, there's a very interesting article that Colonel Ajay Shukla, who's a former cavalry officer of the Indian Army, wrote in 2014, which was when the Indian Air Force was planning these celebrations for 1st September 1965. And interestingly, his article begins by talking about, he says, well, probably an apocryphal tale, but nonetheless very close to the truth, that there was an Indian Air Force officer at the National Defense University who went to the librarian and said, where can I find the IAF history? And the librarian, without looking up, said, in the fiction section, sir. So, well, we are not here to undermine the adversary. I think the Indian Air Force is a professional force. But how do you look at the events? And I want you to also give me your expert opinion on one thing that we noted, which was the IAF strike early morning of 26 February. It was a standoff strike. Then we also saw what happened on the morning of 27th February. Once again, it seems to me that the classic dogfight era is largely over, and it's about the beyond visual range strikes and an integrated battlefield. Do you also think that the nature of air war in this area has changed?
Yes, of course it has. But let me begin with Ajay Shukla. I think I would give more credit to the Indian Air Force than Ajay Shukla does. A good guy and a brave man to be able to say what he did, but let's end it there. It's for the Indian Air Force and the Indians to decide what to do with their service, what to do with the Air Force, and how to develop it. And I'm sure they must have done a satisfactory job of developing and coordinating what they need. Essentially, let's get back to the 26th, which is, I think, what continues to perhaps leave some questions behind. The manner of the standoff bombing is something which perhaps very few tend to understand. Standoff bombing, of course, gives you a safety distance. You can launch at the LOC and you can hope that it will make the 60 kilometers inside and whatever distance you want to go in. But we forget that the target may be covered by or intercepted by numerous peaks, as was the case at Balakot. So while the bombs were semi-intelligent and bombs knew where to head, but bombs could not really negotiate the peaks and the trees and what else came in between. So one of the factors that you got to keep in mind is when releasing such standoff weapons is that you got to give a clear flight to the bomb. Now that is something for all the planners to understand and know how to develop, how to determine, or how to give a clean flight to their bomb so that it knows where to go, but it has a clean flight to it. That morning or that night, the targets chosen by the Indian Air Force and the manner of the delivery did not permit a clean flight, and that is why they dropped shot. So I think that should clear, if any, air at all in terms of why the Indian bombs did not drop where they were meant to, while the Pakistanis did. On to the Pakistani strike now. I think the Pakistanis struck the targets that were well within the flight capacity of the bombs that they were using. So we did not, and the manner of flight and the patterns that we were employing in terms of delivery of those weapons. We've flown with them for a very long time. We know the weapons very well. We have trained very hard, and as Javed said, and I must reiterate the point, it's a long journey. And it's a long journey of which we all have been contributors to this journey. And it brings us a great amount of satisfaction to see how all elements of what we had thought a modern combat would necessitate have come together to give us the results that they did on the 27th morning. So it's not only that one fighter pilot or a couple of aeroplanes were shot down or two pilots did the whole job so well. It was how they all worked in synergy and were able to bring about a mission together. So final point that you made, I agree with you. The beyond visual range was something that was lacking in our inventory for a long time. And as you're well aware, we were able to negotiate that, get the BVR missiles of the highest quality that is there in the world today, whenever they arrived, 2008 or something. And we have since integrated those extremely well. Our pilots, even when we did not have the beyond visual range missiles, knew exactly how to employ them, how to defend against them, and how to use them. That's again the beauty of how you envision what your service should look like and how you employ and train your people to be professional in the terms of their engagements. So all in all, a very satisfactory thing, very satisfactory event. Does it mean the IAF is finished forever? Not at all. I think it's a very professional force, and I think we need to respect it for what it has and what it can do. I think we can only gain satisfaction from the fact that what we have and what we trained for and what we conceived ourselves in terms of a modern combat, we got all of them together and I put them together in a great package.
Absolutely. I'm going to return to the Air Force and its training and capabilities. But let me go to General Mustafa here. General Mustafa, sir, you commanded a corps that is obviously responsible for the line of control and also further up north. Give me a sense of how the planning works. So the day they struck, obviously, and then the Pakistan Air Force struck, I'm assuming that there has to be coordination because in case of an escalation or in case of a ground incursion by the Indian Army troops along the line of control, there must be some protocol, some standard operating procedures, some planning of how to respond to that. Give us a sense of how that works.
Ejaz, the line of control is mostly active almost around the year. And the soldiers occupying the frontline bunkers are absolutely not only ready, familiar, but somehow eager to engage their enemy, because the sense says that there is kind of a, thought process going on in India that Pakistan Army probably after 71 isn't capable of doing what it's supposed to be doing. And that is what actually encourages our youngsters sitting there. The second most important thing is that the people leading and commanding this area have been given very clear instructions with regard to the rules of engagement, what is to be done in a certain circumstance. Like, for example, on 26, what happened, our troops on ground actually were alert all along, because the kind of thing which had happened in Pulwama, people were apprehensive that Indians might do something funny. And for that, the people on ground were were ready, eager, waiting. 26th, nothing happened on ground, but a lot of artillery had been built up across the line of control by the Indians. And that continues to be there, and some movement continues to take place, because for them to engage themselves into a firefight, because crossing the line of control, there are two hazards to it. One is that they have put up a huge barbed wire all along, and that is what gives them away, because wherever the barbed wire is removed by the Indians, our people get alert and they're ready. This is part of surprise package for them also. And also because, if you recall, there was previously, about a year back, I think it was 2017, when Indians actually celebrated another kind of a surgical strike, in which they had said that they had crossed the line of control.
Yeah, 2016, September 2016,
sorry,
the so-called surgical strike.
Surgical strikes. Yeah. So that, keeping that in mind, our people were ready. The reserves, which are at all levels of deployment, immediate response capability has been built up there. That in case the enemy tries to remove the barbed wire and go across, people are ready. The second thing that our people have been trained for is, and that is what the Indians probably fear most, that the youngsters climb into, go across, and get into positions. From there they can observe the hardened bunkers of the Indian Army. And those are the bunkers which are engaged then. And for those, our artillery and our other heavy firing weapons can again, they're precarious, it's tough, it's difficult, but our boys have been trained to do that. And they move stealthily, get themselves into position. And whenever there is this chance of Indians trying to up the ante, our people get them. If you recall, the last 3-4 years, number of Indian strong points have been destroyed by our firefight. And that is what actually scares them. And therefore, our people on 26th, all through 27th, and particularly because this was a plan, and our DGSPR had made very clear that now India must wait, we'll surprise them. And Indians probably, besides air, the Indians also had ready on ground, and their some plans were, I reported that probably at some point they will cross the line of control, get across few kilometers, and giving the impression that on 26th, and combined with this ground operation, they have avenged what they call this Pulwama attack. But more seriously, what Pakistan displayed that day, no one, a calmness which comes from an extremely strong confidence on themselves, and the kind of support that they have, and the kind of weapon system that they have. The second thing was the resolve that this has to be done, period. And that was done by Pakistan's Air Force.
Absolutely, but here's the thing, Mustafa, to move on, if we had done something following the narrative of 2016 about the surgical strikes, then perhaps we could have nipped this in the bud, but that's the counterfactual. But thank you so much. That was General Ghulam Mustafa speaking with us about how the ground troops are conditioned to respond to any ingress on the ground. But let's get back to Pakistan Air Force. Marshal Ahmed, one of the questions that arose following the Indian strike on the morning of 26 February was why could the Pakistan Air Force not intercept the Indian strike package, Indian Air Force strike package? So for the informed journalists, tell us how this works. Is this about rules of engagement? Is this about the fact that the Indians also launched a standoff strike and didn't really ingress too much into the Pakistani airspace? What exactly happened?
I think you need to understand the dynamics of air warfare to understand how easy it is to violate the border of a country. Now, this is not like land borders where you have to cross and you physically go. If you look at the daily flying which happens on both sides of the border, where at a time around 100 or even more aircraft are flying, you may find them flying parallel to the your borders at supersonic speeds, which in many cases around 600 knots plus. And all it takes for you to violate a border is to just turn for a while, go across and then come back. Now this is one factor, because the dynamics of violating the aerial borders, the dynamics of violating the sea borders or the land route is absolutely different. If you say how easy it is, I think it is very easy to violate a border. If you ask the PF to do it, it can do it daily, and so can the Indians. What I am saying is that yes, the Air Force was prepared, but we must also understand there are rules of engagement. The rules of engagement of a first strike and the rules of engagement for the counter strike which PF did. The rules of engagement prevalent on the night once the Indians decided to enter Pakistan, which they actually did not. The aircraft just turned and came in by about 3 to 4 kilometers, in which the weapons were just dumped and they missed the targets. Now, if PF had shot those aircraft, which PF could, we could have chased them across the border. Please remember, the next day, a Su-30 was shot across the border well inside Indian territory. And this now can be very easily undertaken with BVR weapons. So the rules of engagement of the Pakistan Air Force prohibited any combat across the border at that point in time. Now this would not have held true even if the rules of engagement had been different the next day. But even then the Air Force followed very stringent rules on 27th. So interception of those aircraft was possible. They could have been shot down, they could have been chased, but then the dynamics of air warfare come in. A lot of aircraft could have fallen if the PF had decided to cross the borders. We had superior weapons, we could have taken them on. But the rules of engagement did not let our pilots to cross the border. So this is as far as the 26th is concerned, but on 27th, the Air Force had clear instructions not to let anybody violate our borders, shoot whosoever crosses, and make sure that the debris falls inside Pakistan's territory, and shoot any other threatening aircraft. And that is why in this well-planned maneuver, you shot down an aircraft, caught the pilot inside Pakistan, shot down the other aircraft well inside India, and caused a fratricide on the third one. So I would say practically on that day, the Air Force can very conveniently claim 3 kills, which we in all modesty claim 2. But in practical, 3 aircraft were shot down and 1 pilot captured, 6 plus probably 2 killed.
Absolutely. Now, I'm happy that you about the fratricide. AVM Shahzad Chaudhry. Of that, it was a very embarrassing episode for the Indian Air Force and also Indian ground defenses. As a matter of fact, the inquiry report was withheld until after the elections on the government's instructions. Give us a sense of, because we know that there are these specific areas in and through which the aircraft take off and land. There's also the IFF system. There are other ways of determining whether a bird is friendly or otherwise. So was it disorientation? Was it sheer panic? What exactly was it that got the ground air defense to shoot down their own IAF helicopter?
Surely. But you'll permit me to answer or add a couple of words to what Javed just mentioned.
Sure,
I think it's very important to underline what we need to understand here in terms of a pervasive air defense capacity or capability. The air defense capability of any air force, and this is through absolute conviction that I say this, is in its offensive capability. So what you're telling the other side is, if you hit me, you can, but remember, I'll hit you harder. And so this deterrence is what deters people from violating at the frequency that Javed mentioned at will. So really, there is no will, because if it happens or continues to happen, then soon you will get hit harder in a return, similar sort of undertaking. So that's I think the deterrence side of the airspace or air power, which must be underlined and understood. And that's exactly what happened on the 27th. Okay, on to how and why this fratricide takes place. Look, like I said in the very beginning, I expect the Indian Air Force to be better than what they were. I've happened to listen to some of the radio chatter that day, or how things were on the other side of the border in this particular 27th incident. And while I may not comment on the character of it, but I surely imagine that when it happens in another country, for example, I mean, I don't want to name that friendly country again in our neighborhood where an airliner went down. But the question that you asked yourself was no one controlling it? Why did it happen? Why did someone go trigger happy and fired a missile on its without any instructions? Or was there nobody to give an instruction to them? Was there no coordination in terms of which flight is taking place at what time? The modern air defense system actually links everybody together, in the sense that if you have something flying in the air which is identified, that shall be identified on every screen and on every scope. So if it is being identified as a friendly on a screen or a scope, this is your own, and you're not able to hit it. You should not be hitting at. But if it does get hit and you end up into a fratricidal situation, chances are that you did not know that this was your own. Now that leaves open many more questions. I'm not going to jump onto those assumptions, but the fact is that surely the modern air forces of the world have far better ways of identifying and determining and decision making. This is all a process of decision making at the right levels to reach that point where a trigger is pressed to bring down a flying machine or flying aeroplane. Obviously, something went wrong that day on the Indian Air Force side. And also keep in mind, there was a lot of confusion. I think the electromagnetic spectrum in the air was quite confusing for them. They were quite confused about it.
I'm sorry for interjecting there. I think that's a very important point. I was actually trying to get you to this point, because some of the stuff that we heard had to do with how the Pakistan Air Force had dominated the electronic warfare side of the environment. So I'm happy you talked about that, but please go on.
Yeah. So really, again, you got to tactically. This is not again a pervasive capacity or a capability. You got to choose the moment, got to choose the time when you want to, for that sort of a capability to come in and do its tactical bit, create that zone of confusion, and it should be so timed that you are able to exploit an advantage or a benefit out of it. Now there's a passive side to it as well, and the passive side is that the enemy ends up making a mistake. Now you may be gaining your advantage in terms of how you are making it a part of your tactic. But what the enemy in turn does is, or what it ends up doing is, that it also shoots one of its own down, unfortunately for them. But 6 of them went down in that particular incident. And it is also said, Ejaz, that the helicopter was airborne actually to look for on a search and rescue mission. Why? What for? What had fallen down that they were trying to look at? That could
possibly be the Su-30 MKI that got hit. But I'm going to take a short break here and return to discuss this further. Stay with me. Welcome back to Indus Special and our discussion of what happened on the morning of 27th February. We are also joined by former Air Commodore Syed Muhammad Ali. Thank you to him also. But before I go any further, since there was some discussion about the standoff strike done by the IAF, and it was AVM Shahzad Chaudhry who tried to explain why it could not succeed, I also in the interim pulled up a write-up by former Air Commodore Qasr Tufal, which has something very interesting. And he says there was a mismatch between the target elevation sensed by the GPS of the bombs and the orthometric elevation, which is the mean sea level, which is above mean sea level as given on aeronautical charts. high-resolution satellite images of the bomb impact craters provided by European Space Imaging clearly show that all the bombs missed their targets by similar distances and in the same direction, indicating a mission planning miscalculation. Now, Air Commodore Qasr Tufal also says the option of delivering the bombs in the electro-optically guided mode was not possible due to complete cloud cover and heavy rain in the area for several days. In any case, it was a riskier option as the bombs had to be guided through data link all the way till impact and would have entailed IAF aircraft getting into the lethal range of beyond visual range missiles of PAF interceptors. So this also, this was a corroboration of what AVM Shahzad Chaudhry and also Air Marshal Javed Ahmed were trying to, sort of explain to us earlier in the program. But let me go to Air Marshal Ahmed here with another question, which is about, obviously, the Indian Air Force has learned its own lessons from this. There was also a talk about, immediately after this, by both the former IAF Air Chief and also the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi about, if we had the Rafales, this would have been different. So now they have a squadron of Rafales, which has the Meteor and Scalp missiles, air-to-air and air-to-ground. Does that change, given the BVR dynamics of air war now is likely to change the scenario or add some more capability to the Indian Air Force that the PAF has to factor in?
The Rafale, we must understand, is not a new aircraft. It's been there for almost 2 decades. And similarly, the Meteor has been under development and gradual enhancement in capabilities that has taken place. Obviously, if you add a new weapon system, it disturbs the conventional balance, and then the other side has to counter and take steps to counter the imbalance which has been caused. Now, beyond that, if you critically look at the Rafale, how many Rafales would you need to defend the entire Indian airspace and the thousands of miles of border which you have between India and Pakistan? What we must remember is that the dynamics of conflict between countries which have contiguous borders is absolutely different. The areas on both sides are heavily populated. If you want to employ air in one sector and fight in that particular sector with Rafales, don't you expect a response in the other sectors? Now we are going into the aspects of air strategy. If you look at Balakot, and one of the blunders which I usually point to is the handling of air strategy by the politicians, by the political group in India. Now, if Mr. Modi had to take a decision of employing air power on a night, which there were a lot of problems in terms of weather, and whether the IAF was confident enough to undertake those strikes, or whether the targets selected were really, and were the Indians really prepared to kill 300 people on ground, there are many questions which come out of how this entire planning was done and whether it was only done to gain political mileage. Coming back to the question of Rafales, the PF would counter the Rafales in due course of time. Even now they can be countered with tactics. All the PF needs to do is to shoot one Rafale down. The Meteor is a good missile, but then the dynamics of air combat are very, very different. And the PF, once we did not have the BVRs, it spent decades in countering all the IAF BVRs because it's within visual range weapons, and the PF is well used to taking care of such weapons.
Absolutely. Okay, let me pull in Air Commodore Syed Mohammed. Air Commodore, what Air Marshal Ahmed is saying is very interesting. Now, if they employ the Rafales in one sector, what about the other sector? So, which brings me to this question of the mainstay, which is the Su-30 MKI, the flanker. They have about 234 of them, or perhaps 233 now that one of them was shot down. But they seem to have shied away from using their mainstay. So does that indicate inferiority of Su-30 MKI, which aviators tell me is a pretty good multi-role fighter, or is it because they just got completely disoriented by what happened on the morning of 27th February?
Thank you very much, Ejaz, for having me on your show. First of all, my respects to Air Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry and Air Marshal Javed, who are such great fighter pilots their own time, and I'm actually honored to be sitting really with one of my instructors also, was Air Marshal Javed, who actually taught us how to fly when I was at the academy. Before I answer your question about Su-30, I would like to tell you that PF, the IF had beyond visual range missiles long before the PF, and they have been flying those missiles on a number of their platforms. What PF did was, PF developed very fine tactics, and we were practicing those tactics to take on any Indian fighter during the time, till the time we did not have the BVR missile. So it's not that the PF is scared of any BVR or any kind of missile. They're always, a way to handle and develop your own tactics to a problem. So be it Rafale or be it the Meteor, which is we can always have some other missile which can counter Meteor. We can develop our tactics, and we are very much capable and ready to take on any such aircraft. Now about Su-30. Su-30 is a very capable platform, as you rightly said, and I'm impressed about your accuracy of data. Yes, one is down. Now they have about 233. Very capable platform. You can call it a flying armory. Still, they weren't able to employ it properly. If you've seen that seminar which the IF conducted in the Gwalior, and one of their ex-air chief, and there was another weapons specialist who was bragging that we honed the tactics of evading BVR missiles. So was that the IF really trying to do with a flying armory, and you just trying to practice their skills of evading an AMRAAM or whatever BVR that the PF had to fire on them? I think that was very, very, I would say, foolish, if that the word that comes to my mind.
Okay. Since we are also running out of time, I'll quickly go back to AVM Shahzad Chaudhry. AVM Chaudhry, let me throw into the mix the S-400, which is, as you know, as A2AD system. Now, we have already discussed this. This is an integrated battlefield. I'm also aware of the fact that the Pakistan Air Force has been exercising, which are essentially the suppression of enemy air defense exercises in the S-300 PMU environment. Now, give me a sense, and India is going to acquire its first S-400 regiment in 2022. How are we looking at that?
Look, Ejaz, if the Indians had chosen the surface-launched AMRAAM, the air defense system that the Americans are offering them, I would have been a little more worried. For the simple reason that it's a medium-range missile. It can perhaps, I'm sure, can be moved around a little bit. Similarly, as is the S-400. S-400 definitely is a far more resolute system in terms of air defense. But remember, these are fixed systems in the sense of their operation. You got to have a radar in the middle somewhere. You have a tracking radar. You need to have batteries all around. So therefore, you have this complex of about maybe 40, 50 odd vehicles or long trailers which need to be moved whenever the S-400 must shift from one point to the other, which makes it a semi-fixed kind of a defensive system. Now, in a semi-fixed defensive system, fortunately, the possibility of moving it around too much is obviously not there. The other thing is the cost. Now you'll need to cover the entire Indian airspace. You'll need to know the cost of, you'll need to spend that kind of a cost to cover the entire space. Impossible. No country in the world can ever do it. So therefore, you tend to focus your such kind of defensive systems around your VPs, vulnerable points, your command headquarters, or things like that. And therefore, the other side is generally aware of their location. So whenever you do your planning, you've got to keep in mind what you're working against, what do you have on the other side. You can employ your electronic warfare, you can employ tactical maneuvers, you can use all those measures to try and keep away from what is going to give you cause of harm. So I think that is the way that we can look at. But quickly on to another point, the Rafale, the Su-30 and the F-16 Block 52 are all generation 4.5 platforms. So we're not in a bad company. If anything, we were ahead of, Su-30 wise, perhaps India was ahead of us, but we got the Block 52 caught on very quickly with them, and therefore we can now face off. Now there are other things which hone and refine.
So, which brings just for my own information, where would you place the C&D Thunders in this category?
It's a good workhorse. Let me put it at that. I think it'll do its bit.
Okay. Let me go to Air Commodore Syed Muhammad Ali here. Air Commodore Ali, AVM Shahzad Chaudhry talked about how we can deal with S-400. But here's the thing. On the other side, because S-400 is not just a defensive system, it can also be used in an offensive mode. If they were to decide to take out our eyes in the sky in order for the Pakistan Air Force to go blind and then send in strike packages, and they could do that with the S-400 missiles. It has 4 different types of missiles. How could we tackle that kind of situation?
These scenarios are war-gamed. What you are mentioning, a number of such examples are available even on the internet when some amateurs are bragging about S-400, mostly Indians, and they talk of such scenarios. In the real world, you have seen the employment is very, very different. When we go in and we have to plan a strike, then we take care of every electronic signature that could be there, every threat that could possibly you could encounter, and then you find your own ways how to pass through that safely and come out successfully. So it's not that simple. That one missile somebody can really take on an eye in the sky just like that, sitting at a long distance. These weapons are there, but they are always counter to those. And if somebody can threat our eyes in the skies, the others, the adversary's eyes in the skies are also equally threatened.
Okay, that makes sense. I also have to wrap up the program shortly, so let me go back to Air Marshal Javed Ahmed. Yeah, Air Marshal Ahmed, given this scenario, one of the things that the Pakistan Air Force did on the morning of 27th February was to select targets, lock them, but then not hit them in order to A, show resolve, B, capability, and 3, restraint. Now, is that the thrust of our strategy as far as conflict is concerned?
No, I wouldn't say that. If you talk of Pulwama as an one-off incident, it was very much predictable. I remember Kes writing a paper on this and putting it up at the right quarters on the 14th, which predicted the exact scenario which was likely to happen and what response was planned or should be planned by the Pakistan forces was published in one of my articles on 27th, and the strategy in that was quid pro quo plus, and this is 27th morning before the PF struck back. So I think quid pro quo plus and how you plan to do is scenario based. There are a lot of strategies which can be undertaken to thwart designs by the opposing forces, and which can be, please, what we must remember is that the air has a very dangerous escalatory element. It didn't go beyond that. I would count that to luck. A lot of aircraft could have gone down that day. Where would have the escalation ladder gone in a mere 20 minutes?
Absolutely.
So the strategy for the PF, there are plenty on the table.
Absolutely.
And they are all offensive.
Absolutely. So, I AVM Shahzad Chaudhry wants to put in a word here. AVM Chaudhry?
Quickly.
Yeah.
Quickly, Ejaz, just one thing. You asked a question on the how the offensive capability of the S-400, and I was just wondering. I'm sure you can relate to this because of the fact. Imagine 2 man-pad launchers and 2 people carrying their missiles, who are mobile, who are dynamic, and who are looking for aerial kills. I wish they only knew where the aeroplanes are going to come from. So just multiply this with something which is not as mobile as a 2 man-pad system, and see the difficulty to determine or say this is where I'm going to place my defenses and this is where I expect.
No, I perfectly understand what you're saying, but here's the thing. I mean, we don't really know. So there are people who say that the S-400 capability is also hyped up for market reasons. But we do know that it has multiple sensors, it has multiple radars, and the system essentially integrates the reading by the sensors and the radars and feeds into which missile is going to intercept.
The beauty is in its weapon system, and the beauty is in its missile. Let me tell you that. The agility of its missile. But I'll quickly finish on one more thing. Quickly on one more thing. I'm going to finish on this. You mentioned Narendra Modi saying that I wish we had the Rafales and we would have seen the Air Force that particular day. The Air Chief Marshal Dhanwa, the Air Chief, immediately after his retirement, made an even more excellent or apt remark. It was I'm sure you've seen the videos of that seminar where he says, I can tell you this is not the way that the Indian Air Force should operate. This is after 3 years of having commanded the Indian Air Force, and it must change its way of functioning and performing.
Absolutely.
So there you are.
Absolutely. Thank you such AVM Shahzad Chaudhry, Air Marshal Javed, Ahmed, Air Commodore Syed Muhammad Ali. This is all for tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Until then, it's goodbye and good night.